Hi, Jay from EcoTech, and I'm here with Dr. Capone.
Hello, Jay.
Also known as Christian to us over here at EcoTech. We've had a long relationship with you guys over at Nyos and White Corals, actually. Those of you who are familiar, Nyos and White Corals are actually the same company. We're not the same company,
Yes.
but run by the same brothers.
Owners. Yeah.
Same ones. And we're actually here to talk about the new Nyos Salt Pure, and I think the name's pretty befitting. You want to tell us a little bit about it?
Yes, so for the Nyos Pure Salt, we are using ultra pure pharmaceutical grade ingredients. And I think this is a really important factor for a good salt mix, that you're using high quality raw materials, because every raw material comes with an impurity. So for example, some magnesium has impurity of manganese or calcium. Basically every ingredient will have an impurity, and you need to select the raw materials that you have as less impurities as possible in the salt, and that's what we did.
To kind of take a step back, right, is that when we talk about being reef keepers, or particularly live coral, where salt becomes a very critical component, we always, the old saying, right, is that we don't keep an aquarium, we keep water. And when it comes to a saltwater aquarium, salt is kind of that foundation, right, at the very beginning. So you start with good salt, you're going to start with good salt water, is going to make sure that everything downstream goes well. And because of that, there's really kind of two things with salt, right? And I don't want to be dramatic, but you can hurt your tank quickly, or you can hurt your tanks slowly if you're not using really good salt, right?
Yeah. So the other important thing is that the parameters are stable over several batches. So you really need to make sure that the salt is mixed very well, homogeneously, so that the salt really has the parameters it's supposed to have.
You know, when people talk about bad salt, right, they could be talking about two things. One is they could be talking about batch to batch consistency, and that's where we talk about salt being potentially bad or damaging to your tank quickly, and where a good salt is going to exhibit very stable batch to batch parameters, right? And that has a lot to do with the manufacturing process, storage, and potentially to a degree the quality of the materials being used. And then the other part of that is the long-term use of the salt. So a really good salt like Nyos Pure is going to be very clean, right? And that's what you're talking about. It just has very low levels of impurities, so that over time of using that salt, you don't have to fight those different levels or adjust for lack of them, right, in your aquarium.
Yes, exactly.
So what makes, I'm getting to the big thing here, which I love about your salt, which, you know, sneak peek right here, it's on the label. But how do you, well, starting at the beginning, right? You made this because basically you're looking for a salt for your own aquaculture facility that is extremely consistent, and also means that you don't have to tweak a lot of the parameters on an ongoing basis.
Yeah, I think that's very important. So when you do a water change, you don't want to elevate your alkalinity, calcium, magnesium with the water change. You want to keep these parameters stable. So the goal of a water change is not to raise some levels like calcium or alkalinity uncontrolled. You just maybe want to remove some water from the tank because there are organics in the tank you want to remove. But the reason for water change is not to change the parameters, right?
And if, for instance, one of these parameters was off, or if there's impurities in it, what's going to happen is you're going to compound that over time.
Yeah, right. Because for example, in natural seawater, you have a manganese level of between 0 and 3 micrograms per liter. And in some salts, you could have a manganese level of over 100 micrograms per liter. And if you're doing big water changes, then this can affect your corals. I mean, if you're doing like a 5% or even less water change, maybe it doesn't do a lot for your corals, but if you're constantly doing water changes and high water changes, you're getting these impurities into your tank.
And some of these impurities can actually be quite bad for coral in particular over a long period of time, correct?
Yes. I mean, it doesn't mean that when you do a water change with a high impurity salt that the corals are instantly dying, but it will stress the corals. So, for example, they're getting slimy and or polyps are not opening up for a certain amount of time, and you clearly want to avoid that.
And then how do you manage the batch to batch? So you use pharmaceutical grade ingredients. That's how you maintain the purity of all of these and reduce any of impurities going into the salt. And then the mixing process, obviously you do that in-house. You've invested in all of the equipment necessary to make sure that you have extremely high batch to batch consistency. But then you take it a step further as well, right? Which is where the ICP testing comes in.
Exactly. So every single batch is third-party ICP tested. So of course we are doing our own quality checks, but we are also sending a sample of every batch to a third party, and they are doing an ICP test, and we are including this ICP test with the salt. So on the lid of the salt there's a small QR code. Yeah, maybe you can show it. And then you can check the QR code and you'll see the full analysis of the ICP.
So tell me a little bit more about the ICP testing. Basically, you're taking, after you do a mix of salt or a batch of salt, you're sending this off to ICP at Triton. They come back with a reading. How does that work exactly?
Yes, so we are taking one sample per batch and send it out to Triton. And you have to take into consideration that the biggest ingredient compared to the smallest ingredient is 1 million times bigger. So if you're sending a sample from a batch and to Triton and you're getting the perfect spot-on parameter of the smallest ingredient, then you know that the whole batch has to be homogeneous.
So that would be sort of like if you had a eyedropper of food coloring, you put it into a swimming pool, and then you sent it out and it tested and told you that you'd put an eyedropper into the swimming pool, then you can be pretty sure that the swimming pool is as the swimming pool ought to be.
Exactly. And I mean, of course, we also did testing with sending several samples of one batch to the ICP lab, but they're really coming literally the same. So you won't see any difference between the several samples of one batch.
And I bet some of your customers probably send this out as well. Do you get a lot of independent verification on the quality of the salt?
Yes, of course. I mean, some of the customers, they're just doing their own ICP testing. And of course, we sometimes hear from customers, oh, I got a different calcium reading on my test kit. And my recommendation is always to do your own ICP test. And then you can see that what's on the box is really in the box.
And then the trickle-down effects of this, there's some other interesting aspects to having a very pure and very clean salt. And that goes into actually using the salt itself. And we'll get in and play with that in a second, because I think this is really cool about the Nyos salt in particular, how clean it is. And that comes from the ingredients. But then this was one of the things that I've noticed from different salts is that each salt brand has a recommendation of when you can use it, and that actually makes it almost a little bit less flexible. Like I remember salt back in the day, salt that I used would be, you shouldn't use it immediately, you should mix it and let it sit for some length of time. I don't remember what it was. And then vice versa, I've seen other salts which are, you must use this within 2 to 3 days. And that neither of which is the case with the Nyos salt. The Nyos salt, once you mix it, it mixes super clean, and then there's no restrictions on when, right? You can store this salt once it's mixed, yes, or you can use it immediately after mixing it, correct?
Yeah, so you can use it right away once it's clean. So in our farm, we are just mixing it and directly using it. But on the other hand, you can also keep it if you want to for a week, several weeks, months, if you want to, and then use it. Both is possible, but usually it's the case that people want to use it as fast as possible, and this is really a cool thing that once it's clean, you can directly use it on your tank.
And why is that? Because salts that tell you to wait, is that because because there's material in there that should precipitate out, or to let it mix better, or what is generally the reason why a salt would not want you to use it right away?
I cannot tell for sure what the idea is behind it from other companies, but it might be that if you have high impurities, then you mix the salt, you maybe want to wait until these impurities are participating out of the water, and that might be the reason why they say, okay, please wait for some hours, some days before you use it.
Certain salts, when you use them, unlike the Nyos Pure, are actually kind of cloudy, and that settles out, or that sort of vanishes or dissipates over time. What's the difference, or what causes that versus the Nyos Pure, which does not do that, for example?
I mean, if you're having really high elevated levels of, for example, calcium or alkalinity in the salt, that can cause a cloudiness. And since we are not having elevated levels, we are having the same levels like you typically see in marine tanks, we are not having this issue. So coming back to the impurities, we talked about the impurities you can see on the ICP, for example, like manganese or zinc or any other inorganic element. But there are other types of impurities as well. So for example, there are organic impurities. You can see that when you do a test in a white bucket, so just put the mixed salt in a high white bucket and have a look on it on top. If it's super clear, then there's no organic impurities, but if it has a yellow tint, then you're probably having organic impurities as well. So we want to avoid that as well, because we don't see an advantage of adding uncontrolled organics into your tank. And the third part of the impurities are the insoluble parts of the salt. For example, if there's a rock in the salt, you won't see that on the ICP, but you will see it in your mixing container. And some salts also have really high amounts of insoluble impurities.
And the organics is an interesting one as well, because the organics is the one that usually dictates that you have to use, if a salt has a requirement to use it within a certain period of time, it's usually because there's organic impurities, correct? That will cause bacteria growth or other problems with that salt mix, unless it's added to the aquarium.
Yeah, exactly. So if you have organic impurities, then probably bacteria will start to grow sooner or later and eat the organics out, and also change the salt water.
It's an interesting discussion, isn't it? I think because as soon as we've progressed as aquarists, and maintaining the water is actually a lot of times coming to knowing what you're putting in it and controlling it, rather than trying to add more things to it. And I think that's where the Nyos Pure, as the name implies, is just a really good product, because you can trust it not to be doing something to your aquarium which it's not supposed to be doing to your aquarium, which gives you more control over everything else that you are actually doing to your aquarium as well.
Yes, so we think that transparency is getting more and more important in the hobby. It's not like in the old days where you claim that if you're adding this magic thing, then it does X and Y. Now with the ICP, you can really see what you're adding, and that helps the hobby that it's now more transparent.
So to summarize, reasons to get a particularly good salt, and I will say the Nyos Pure is definitely one of, if not the best out there for this, is ingredients which are pure pharmaceutical grade, which means no impurities, which means you're not adding things to your tank which over time could get to levels which could be problematic for you, or that you may have to compensate for with other additives or different processes to get rid of. It is batch to batch consistent, and it is tested as such each batch. So your probability or possibility of having a bad batch, which could negatively impact your tank quite dramatically, is virtually impossible. And then the salt itself, going back to the lack of additives and impurities, means that you can either mix it and use it right away, and we'll finish with that test, or you can actually store it for water changes for a prolonged period of time, and it won't make any difference in terms of the quality of the salt water that you've produced from it.
Yes.
Does that
It's
get
a very good summary.
Okay, so there you go. So if you're looking for really good salt, obviously the Nyos Pure is a particularly good one, and definitely check it out if you see it in the store. Scan that QR code as well, because then you can see exactly what's in that batch. Triton does the ICP testing
Yes,
for
that's
Nyos.
correct.
To just kind of show how pure or clear this salt is in general, I think we should actually mix some here. Now, typically, what do you recommend? About 2 to 3 minutes is good mixing for Nyos Pure salt?
I mean, just mix it until it's clear. Usually 3 minutes are enough. If it, of course, depends on how you mix it and also the temperature, but sometimes even 2 minutes are enough. So let's just give it a try and see.
I'll let you do the honors here. Put in our stirrer.
Yeah, where you can turn the zero on.
So there we go.
Let's start.
So there we go. It's stirring, and I mean, almost immediately you can see it starting to dissolve. And I've done this a few times with the actual product in a bucket, so I know this goes very quickly. But it is just absolutely incredible how clear the water gets so quickly compared to some of the other salts we've used.
Yes, I think.
I mean, I don't know if you can see it on that camera, but already probably about halfway dissolved at this point.
You can see that it's getting clearer and clearer. Just some little salt grains, but I think how long is it mixing at the moment? Like
30 seconds, maybe.
Yes.
A minute. Not even. I mean, at this point, it's just about completely clear. I mean,
Yeah.
That's really impressive.
I mean, most of the thing you can see are the bubbles now, not the salt.
Well, so there you have it. I mean, obviously, you don't want to be putting stuff in your tank, which I think we're done. I think it'd be interesting to test other salts under the same criteria, but I don't think I've seen any that clear as quickly as that. So that's really impressive.